I'd love to introduce our fearless leader of the Agroforestry Coalition. Kitt Healy is here to lead our conversation today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Kitt. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning on this lovely Friday, wherever you are. It's great to be here with you all in this virtual space. And thank you so much to Savanna Institute and all the hard work that is going on to put on this gathering. It's been such a delight to be part of. So thank you, Renee, and everyone for making it all happen. So we are here today to continue some of the conversation that was started in the last session, which was focused on agroforestry policy. And we're going to be diving into the Agroforestry Coalition. And I am the coordinator and strategy lead for the Agroforestry Coalition. And I'd like to start us off. I've brought a few friends with me today. So it's not just going to be me talking for the next hour and then inviting questions. We're going to have a few folks who are co-chairs of Agroforestry Coalition working groups who are going to be helping us out with the storytelling today. So I'd like to start us off by doing introductions of this panel that we have, and then I will give an overview of the Agroforestry Coalition, an overview of the working groups, and then I will hand it off to my colleagues to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the working groups that they are a part of, so that you can see how the structure varies between working groups and how autonomous a lot of the working groups are and how much leverage their leeway they have to be able to decide what they focus on, and some of the really amazing work that is coming out of this coalition, even as it is only about 1.5 years old. So I'll start. I'm Kitt Healy. I'm based in Madison, Wisconsin. I am an independent contractor working with Savanna Institute to do network strategy and coordination for this Agroforestry Coalition. I also am a facilitator, and I really love doing strategic planning work and group process design for sustainable agriculture organizations. So that's what I do. And I have really enjoyed being part of this Agroforestry Coalition and getting to meet all the wonderful people who are part of it. And I will pass it to David next, if you would be willing to unmute and just introduce yourself.
That I can do. Good morning. My name is David LeZaks. I'm the managing director of Food System 6, based in Madison, Wisconsin. I am based in Madison, Wisconsin. Food System 6 is a national organization. And I am the co-chair of the finance working group for the Agroforestry Coalition. And I share that co-chairship with Sarah Larson, who's the executive director of the Food Finance Institute. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you, David. Samantha, would you be willing to introduce yourself next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Bosco. I am also based in Madison, Wisconsin, although only recently moved here a month ago. And I am currently a fellow with the National Agroforestry Center, working on questions about agroforestry plant material supply and demand. And I will be starting a postdoc at University of Wisconsin-Madison, working with farmers, learning why and how they choose and grow their agroforestry systems. I am the co-chair of the demonstration site working group, and my co-pilot, who I believe is here in the audience, is Nathan Ayers.
Nate, do you want to unmute for just a second and introduce yourself so that people know kind of where you're coming from? Only
Sure.
Okay, great.
Thanks for the quick. Hello, my name's Nate Ayers. I'm the co-chair of the Agroforestry Demonstration Farms Working Group along with Samantha. And as Kitt mentioned, it's been really awesome tackling a lot of these larger scaling up issues that a lot of us have identified, but maybe don't have the bandwidth without each other to work on. So the Agroforestry Coalition has been awesome. Highly, highly encourage folks to get involved wherever you feel motivated in your heart. Thank you.
Great. Okay. And last but not least, we will bring on a familiar face to introduce herself in a slightly different context. So Renee, could you come on and share about your role with the coalition?
Hi there, I'm Renee. I co-chair the Communications Working Group along with Mallory Daly from the University of Missouri Center for Agroforestry. And our role is really to think about how we communicate agroforestry to the general public and to our constituents. We've had a great group who've come together all year to talk about messaging, to form a pilot speakers bureau so we can collect spokespeople who are willing to talk to press and to policymakers about agroforestry. And we were instrumental in helping to publish the policy paper last month, which we distributed to policymakers and press to help give them some foundational information about how policy could be improved for agroforestry adoption. So if you're interested in joining the communications working group or the speakers bureau, I'd love to connect and talk about how we can collaborate in 2024. So back to you, Kitt.
Beautiful. Thank you, Renee. All right, so I'm gonna move us into an overview of the Agroforestry Coalition. This is going to include an attempted screen share, so bear with me for the moment while I get that set up. Okay. All right. And so I think when I start the slideshow, I think I won't be able to see the chat anymore. So please unmute and let me know if I'm missing something. If there's a question for clarification that's coming up, yeah, Renee or whoever's paying attention to the chat, it would be great if you could vocally let me know if I need to stop and go back to anything that is unclear or if something happens that I haven't paid attention to. Great. All right, welcome. Welcome to the Agroforestry Coalition. Just as I've scanned through some of the names and faces who are joining us today, I see some folks who are already engaged and some folks for whom this might be brand new information. So either way, I'm glad that you're here, and I hope that this is the beginning of more engagement with the coalition for you. As I mentioned, I'm the strategy lead and coordinator for the Agroforestry Coalition. And so I do a lot of the behind the scenes work, and also one of the great roles that I get to play is sitting in on all the working groups to help hear what's happening and hear what kind of overlapping themes and potential new directions and synergies are developing within the working groups, and then help bring those conversations into their own space so that the groups aren't happening in silos. They're happening together, and we're moving this coalition forward and in new directions as a body, as opposed to just a bunch of different working groups doing their own thing. As an overview of the coalition, our core belief is that agroforestry is an essential element of systemic solutions to the climate, biodiversity, food security, and rural development challenges of our time. Drawing on that core belief, our purpose, the work that we do, or the identity that we claim, is that we are a network of advocates, innovators, and agitators working across sectors to scale up agroforestry in the United States. And our impact is that we spark changes at critical points in agroforestry value chains to reduce barriers to adoption of agroforestry practices and products. And one of the key pieces that's really unique, I think, to this coalition and that helps us to be successful is this working across sectors. We really see that coalition, we see ourselves as a cross-sector connector. And so whereas there are other networks that are focusing on supporting folks and doing peer learning and education and research and all this wonderful work that's focused on the people who are doing agroforestry, this is really our opportunity to draw in all the adjacent sectors, all of the other places where, you know, we need the finance community to be on board in order to scale agroforestry. We need policy work to be on board. And there's many examples of that where the Agroforestry Coalition is creating a space for people who might not get to meet each other or who might not know how they should best plug in to support agroforestry work to learn about what those opportunities are. Our core approach is that we seek to build trust and collaboration capacity across sectors, as I just said. We support peer-to-peer learning and exchange. We grow political power through strategic communication and engagement, as you just learned about in the last session. We accelerate emergent member-led projects, which we will learn about more as we dive into the working groups. And we're committed to regular reevaluation of the purpose and scope of the Agroforestry Coalition. And this is really essential to the approach and to the logic of how this coalition is designed, is that it's designed to be responsive to things that change, within the working groups, within the membership, and also things within the external operating environment that change and might require us to shapeshift in some way. And so nimbleness is a core value and core attribute of this network. To give a bit of an overview on the timeline, and how this coalition got started. The original idea for the Agroforestry Coalition came out of a scaling agroforestry retreat that was held in New York in June of 2022 that was hosted by the Volgenaut Climate Initiative. And at that meeting, Savanna Institute was one of the core partners of that meeting. And then they brought together a bunch of folks who are working in agroforestry to talk about what is needed to scale agroforestry. And one of the main outcomes of that meeting was the skeleton structure for this coalition, where they were able to identify 7 different essential pathways where kind of collaboration acceleration was needed. So where there was a need to build space for people to work together to overcome very particular barriers to scaling agroforestry. And that over time evolved into the coalition. So by October of 2022, the 7 working groups were mostly formed and beginning to launch, or they're at least trying to wrangle people to come into the co-chair roles, which we now have totally filled and have been underway for a while. In March of 2023, I came on as the strategy lead and coordinator, and by that time we had all of the co-chairs confirmed. So that's when the work really began in earnest for many of the working groups. Over the summer, the working groups really dove into their mandate, which I will talk about in a minute, to work together. And in October 2023, due in large part to the efforts of Renee, who is on the phone or on the call today, we launched a website, and the website is here on this slide, which you can see. Please check it out. And this website basically is a landing page for the coalition. So if you want to let somebody know about it, this is a great resource to send them. And it also has a contact us page. So we're getting a lot of requests for new people to join the coalition through that contact page. This website is also the home of the Speakers Bureau, which Renee, I believe, sent a link to, or we'll talk about more in depth later. And so there's all the speakers have their profiles up on this website. Also in October 2023, we formed a steering committee, which I'll talk about again in a little bit when we look at the structure. And in November of 2023, just recently, we received a funding renewal for the next 2 years of the Agroforestry Coalition from the Walton Foundation. So we're very grateful for that money to be able to continue this work. In 2024, we're looking forward to evolution, in-person gathering. We have a little bit of funding in this renewal to try to gather the coalition members in person, and a little teaser, 2 new working groups. So this is the coalition structure that we've built. And again, this is meant to be highly adaptive. We have a steering committee, as I mentioned, that was just formed and has started working together as of November. And the members of that steering committee, right now, actually, it's an interim steering committee at the moment. So this first round of steering committee folks has committed for a 7-month term. And then in that term, they're going to build the structure for the steering committee to then transition into a longer term committee with probably 2-year terms, although we haven't officially confirmed that yet. So if this kind of leadership is something that's of interest to you, please keep that in mind, that we're going to be looking for and soliciting applications for a longer term steering committee sometime in the spring. The current interim steering committee is Kate Wersen at Savanna Institute, Audrey Epps-Schmidt at the Nature Conservancy, Katie Commender at Appalachian Sustainable Development, Aaron Reeser at Greenland's Blue Waters, Steve Gabriel at Wellspring Farm. And so that group of people is coming together to tackle some of these bigger picture structural elements of and build a scaffold for longevity for the coalition, for how decisions are made and how transparent processes are built so that the full membership understands how different choices are happening and why the coalition is evolving the way that it is. Then I'm the coalition coordinator, which is in the second bubble there. Then we have the 7 working group chairs who are trained and paid, and their role is to convene and facilitate their working groups. And then we have a general membership. So there's a Google group listserv that has about 130 members on it. And we part of our strategy is actually to keep our communication, the kind of coalition leadership communication, fairly sparse on that general membership listserv, because we want people to engage when there's an opportunity to go deep. So we're letting people know all the time what's happening in the working groups. I send out quarterly updates, and many people, I think, just choose to stay engaged by staying abreast of what's happening in those working groups. And then when they identify an opportunity that really meets their interest and skill set, that's when we pull them in and say, okay, where can you plug into a working group? Where can you host a conversation? Who do you need to be connected to in order to make this thing happen that you're envisioning? And so that is sort of the general outreach and communication strategy. We also do a lot of relational work of trying to have different conversations with agroforestry advocates and people who are doing agroforestry around the country, just to open up the possibility that there might be a way for them to get engaged in the coalition. And if there is, great. And if there's not, then they know to let us know when they think of some way that we can be useful to support their work. There's a little bit here about the network stewardship and collaboration acceleration role of the coalition. I will credit Fred at Savanna Institute with the term collaboration accelerator. It seemed to me from the beginning that was a great way to describe what the coalition is meant to do. And through that work, our goals are, we are trying to shift power, galvanize the movement, strengthen networks. You can see what all is written here. Those are sort of the big picture role of this network. And then we have our 7 working groups. So the ones that are outlined in green are the working groups that have been up and running for the last year plus. And the ones that are in purple are some emergent working groups that are being considered for this next year. And you can see them all here, so I'm not going to read them out, but then I'm going to go a little bit deeper into what each of those working groups does. This slide is a callback to that first meeting where the idea for the coalition was created. So having just seen the list of the 7 working groups, I just thought it was interesting to see that this was the outcome. This was what was on the whiteboard at the end of that 2022 scaling agroforestry retreat. And so you can see how those lanes of conversation, or the things that that group of people identified as being really important to focus on, how that transitioned into the working groups that we have today. So this is just, I guess, to call back to that initial work that was done. And I think this is really interesting because it captures 3 days of conversation of some people who are really deeply embedded in this work and what they saw as necessary to be able to move this industry and this movement forward. All right, so now I'm going to give a brief overview of the 7 existing working groups, and then I will call in our additional panelists to go a little bit deeper into the working groups that they are leading. So you heard, hopefully many of you were able to join the conversation earlier before this meeting about the policy working group. That is co-chaired by Bev Paul at Davenport Policy and Christelle Zobish at Carbon 180. And the policy working group, their mandate and their role is to identify policy opportunities and work to educate decision makers about the potential of agroforestry as an effective climate solution. And they gave a much deeper description of what they do earlier in this session. But some of the things they've been working on include 2 marker bills that they're shopping around to hopefully get included in the Farm Bill, as well as a few other advocacy efforts that are focused on the Farm Bill, which include getting a definition of agroforestry in the statute, getting funding for 3 new regional agroforestry centers. And so far there's enthusiasm for 1. And as Bev said on the last call, 1 is good, 3 is better. And that's what they're advocating for. And they're also working to get support for agroforestry in conservation programs. Some of the other successes that they've had just over the past year are publishing a white paper on agroforestry, which Renee maybe already shared in the chat. And if not, I'm sure we'll bring up when she talks about her work. There's now a permanent NRCS agroforester, Joe Alley, and Bev and Christelle were instrumental in the advocacy for making that happen. And then, as I mentioned a moment ago, there's been this push for regional agroforestry centers, state TSPs, national TSP certification, agroforestry and local ag marketing and conservation programs. And these are all kind of simultaneous efforts that are in progress and on the horizon, and that we're developing a lot of momentum around. Somebody have a question? Okay, great. There we go. I'm back. Okay, great. The communications working group is co-chaired by Renee at Savanna Institute and Mallory Daly at University of Missouri Center for Agroforestry. And I'm going to deal with this one very briefly because Renee is going to go into a lot more detail. But in general, they develop campaigns, communication materials, editorials, etc., to help educate the public and policymakers on the potential of agroforestry as a climate solution. Sorry, my clicker thing is being a little ambitious. All right, the Ecosystem Services Working Group is co-chaired by Nate Lawrence at Savanna Institute and Joe Farjone of the Nature Conservancy. And you may notice as we go through these that many of the working groups have one Savanna Institute member as a co-chair. And that is that was part of the structure built into the first phase of the coalition, that as SI is incubating the coalition, that they would provide staff time and staff, experienced staff to help lead these working groups. And as the working groups evolve, that is not necessarily the case. We have many working groups now, and hopefully more in the future, where we still have lots of leadership and engagement and enthusiasm from Savanna Institute, but they don't necessarily have to continue to staff the co-chairships. All right, so the Ecosystem Services Working Group is Nate and Joe, and they convene Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities grant recipients to learn about approaches to climate impact measurement, reporting, and verification. So this is an example of the group that has taken a structure, the policy and the communications group, which we just talked about. Their structure is that they're intentionally very open. Anyone who's interested in those meetings can come to as many meetings as they want to. They could not come to the meetings if they want to. It's, they are attempting to build community within, but it's a very open and public-facing working group. The Ecosystem Services Working Group is one where they wanted to focus on a particular group of people that could go really deep together. So the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities grant recipients all have, the ones that are related to agroforestry, all have some sort of requirement to do climate impact measurement and reporting and verification. And how that measurement, reporting, and verification is happening, the conversation about what metrics they're using, what systems, what methods, maybe which companies they're contracting with to do that work. That all it's a common conversation that benefits everyone who has received one of these grants. And so Nate and Joe had the idea to convene the recipients, the grant recipients, and then have some of those companies who do like carbon sequestration measurement, for example, to come on and talk to the group about their process, what they do, and basically how they are going to go about collecting this information and organizing it and analyzing it so that it can easily match the reporting and verification requirements for the USDA. So these are high-level technical conversations. There have been folks who haven't received one of these grants who are on the calls, but they just kind of get a disclaimer that it might be it's a very technical conversation. And so Yardstick is one of the companies, USDA and Working Trees are all presenting at various points in this seminar series is basically how this working group is set up. And then after that seminar series is complete, they'll have an opportunity to evolve. So if ecosystem services measurement is something you love, please go ahead and get in touch, and it would be great for you to be part of envisioning the next evolution of this working group. Then we have Nurseries and Germplasm Development Working Group, and that is co-chaired by Scott Brainerd at Savanna Institute and Amy Miller at Route 9 Chestnut Cooperative and Ohio State University. And they have been focused on nursery development and in increasing the quantity and viability of nurseries for agroforestry plant material throughout the US. And they got started really quickly on building a mini grant program in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. And the thought on this was that there are some bottlenecks in nursery production that are common to many nursery operations. And rather than kind of gathering people together to continue to identify what those bottlenecks are and then talk to each other about it, which is always useful, they wanted to fund people to innovate. So to fund people to design something that could really help them over a period of 5 years, expand their nursery production dramatically or make great strides in propagation, and then be able to share those learnings with the rest of the nurseries community. So they're in the process of building this mini grant program. They did get funding for a pilot project year. So this year they were able to distribute money through the Nature Conservancy of 3 grants to pilot projects, one at University of Minnesota, one at University of Wisconsin, and then another at Ohio State. And one thought for how this group might evolve in the coming year is doing a little more organizing for policy and financial systems advocacy to help overcome these propagation bottlenecks. So this is one of those points where we get to see the working groups begin to converge a little bit. The demonstration farms working group, I will not say very much about. Samantha and Bosco at UW-Madison and ORISE, which is a fellowship, and Nate Ayers are here on the phone, or how do I keep saying phone? We're on the computer, the Zoom. And I know, I'm just outing myself as being born in the 80s. Okay. So they're working together on developing networks and that support. They help to network and help to support demonstration farms throughout the country, serving as a hub of agroforestry education for farmers, landowners, universities, and policymakers. And they will say a bit more about their work coming up. The market development working group has had a huge, tremendous task ahead of them because market development is a massive topic that can be approached from many, many angles. But Tara Johnson at the Food Finance Institute and Bill Davison at Savanna Institute have done a wonderful job of leading this group. They support entrepreneurship and processing infrastructure development for agroforestry products. And some of the actions that have come out of that working group are that they're working to develop an agroforestry product business accelerator, which is based on an existing Food Finance Institute accelerator program. So basically, FFI has these food business accelerators and all these education materials already developed. And the thought is that we will work with FFI to adapt that to particularly an agroforestry focused product audience, both for technical specifics, but also to build community and to help introduce people to each other who can be mutually supportive as they go through the very tricky process of launching an ingredients business, basically, or a final product business. And then also they're working with regional partners to support the launch of a functional berry processing facility in the Midwest. And that is still in early conversation, and stay tuned for how it evolves over time. All right, and then we have the finance working group, which is co-chaired by David LeZaks, Food System 6, Sarah Larson at the Food Finance Institute, and PJ Connolly at the Savanna Institute. And their mandate is to increase the quantity and quality of capital flowing into the agroforestry ecosystem. And David will share a little bit more about that in a moment. But before I hand it over to Samantha, and we'll start with Samantha because I have your slides here on this PowerPoint. I just want to mention that we are so grateful for funding and ongoing support, and also great thought partnership from our funders, which is such a wonderful experience. That we work closely with the Volgenau Climate Foundation and the Volgenau Climate Initiative, as they're called now. The Walton Family Foundation and the Salesforce Foundation have supported this work tremendously. The best way to get involved with the coalition is to go on the website, look at what working groups might appeal to you, and then send me an email or fill out the Contact Us form, which is essentially the same thing as sending me an email on the website, and I can help you figure out where best to plug in. And now I will hand it over to Samantha.
I guess we really
Can't hear you too well, Samantha. Are other folks experiencing?
Someone else has a background. I think someone else is off mute.
Okay, can we make sure everyone's muted, please?
Cool. Thank you. Could we just go back one slide real quick?
Oh, sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Yep.
So the demonstration site working group has been convening since the beginning of 2023, and with the original body of our attendees, one of the major outcomes for our group this year was to produce a map a directory of all of the agroforestry demonstration sites existing across the US. We worked over several meetings to figure out what we wanted to include, what kind of information. And so this map is a kind of our first draft of what this looks like. This took us all year to compile. And so, the map contains really wonderful information about where the sites are located, what kind of site they are, what they produce, and we'll get into some of that in the next slides. But I just want to firstly direct you to the links on the side of this image, where if you want to look at this map yourself and check out the data, there's a nice short link right there. And if you know of a demonstration site or represent a demonstration site that is not on this map, or you don't believe it's on this map and you want to include it, this directory is open and on an ongoing basis for people to contribute to. So we would love more and more folks to add their sites to this directory. Next slide, please. As an overview, we were able to collect information from 30 sites, which has a cumulative age or years of experience of almost 200 years, but most of these were about 6 to 7 years old, ranging from 30 to just 1. A total of 84 practices, averaging 2 to 3 different agroforestry practices per site, and covering almost 1,500 acres. And we know that there's so many more out there. This is really just a first draft of this information, but really already an incredible array of different sizes and shapes and configurations, which is really exciting. Next slide, please. Based on the information that we got from these different sites included in our directory, this is the breakdown of the different agroforestry practices that are represented on these farms or these sites. So they're not only farms, but some of them are really geared towards community education. A total of 84 individual practices with about 2 to 3 per site, with the most being in silvopasture and food forests and going down. And the other category you can see here is broken out and shows lots of other kinds of agroforestry that people are thinking of. Next slide, please. And on these sites, here's a breakdown of the different kinds of foods or different products that are produced, ranging from tree fruit to grain. The bar graphs show these products by count, whereas the pie chart just shows you a proportional breakdown of the same information. So just give people a couple seconds to kind of take this in. So yeah, here we can see just an incredible array of different kinds of foods and products, mostly foods, but also including agritourism and nursery, flowers. So very exciting, complete menu of delicious experiences and foods that these demonstration sites produce. Next slide, please. Oh, back one, please. And just really briefly about the next year coming up. So I'm going to be continuing on as a co-chair, and so will Nate Ayers. And one of the things that we're really excited about in this next year is that we're hoping and we're working towards the National Agroforestry Center as being kind of the forever stewards of this map. And this map will be posted while we saw that short link that is available right now. We're hoping that this is going to migrate to the National Agroforestry Center's website. So this will be on a government website and available to the entire country to see very easily. And we're going to continue coalescing the amazing community that we've been working with. And we hope to actually build not just online opportunities to collaborate, but on the ground opportunities to really come together, the managers and future managers of demonstration sites, to figure out what are the best practices, what are ways that the community can learn from each other. Are there ways that we can visit each other and actually see these things on the ground? And so we're definitely inviting new and fresh ideas and faces. So please join with us in next year. You can do that by emailing Kitt. And we really encourage you, if you know of a demonstration site or represent one, to please add that to the map. And that is a brief overview. And I will, unless Nathan, you want to say anything real quick, cede the time to the next group.
That was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you, Nathan, also. David, can we invite you to share about the finance working group?
Absolutely. Can you hear me? Yes. So Kitt gave a brief introduction of the work of the finance working group, and to kind of tie together some pieces from earlier today, you know, when we wanted trees on farms on purpose, sometimes those trees or other infrastructure, or you know, whether it's the germplasm or other pieces of the agroforestry complex, need capital in order to bring those to fruition. And in some cases, as we've seen, especially with the climate smart commodities grants and some of the philanthropic grants, those have been readily available to help bring those to fruition. But in other cases, we know that we need other types of capital as well, other types of financial capital. And so this working group is primarily composed of a number of different funds or banks or other holders and those who are deploying capital into agroforestry already, and those who are also interested in engaging in new ways to deploy capital to help to support agroforestry. And so the work of this working group really focused on creating a roadmap for what financing the future and scaling of agroforestry looks like. And so we looked at some specific opportunities that this working group and you know, the broader partnership can really begin to dig into in these coming years. So to give a short list of some of these areas, we have investor education. We know that many investors, banks, and others that hold capital aren't aware of agroforestry in general or specifically. What are the returns? What are the risks? What are the markets? What are the opportunities? And all of these things are generally, we found in some of our work, are generally not available to those capital holders out there. And so investor education through briefs, through field days, through visits, through the whole suite of tools there. We also know that in finance, in the finance world, we sometimes need to de-risk, kind of technical term, but to kind of remove the risk from those who are deploying the capital. And sometimes that comes in the form of insurance, which I think was talked about a little bit on the policy side, but also there's some private and quasi-public, quasi-private mechanisms like loan guarantees, that can help to de-risk some of these transactions and to get capital flowing into this space. Not surprisingly, markets and infrastructure both came up in this group as real priorities for investment to flow. There needs to be clear markets. There needs to be infrastructure that is used to bring these products to market. So a capital provider is less likely to provide capital in order to help scale agroforestry if they can't see or envision what all of the pieces of that value chain or value web look like. And that's where, you know, it's great to see that there is the market working group, there is conversations around infrastructure, and that's, I think, the beauty of the Agroforestry Coalition, of being able to connect all these pieces. And we've had some, you know, this working group met with in coordination with some of the other working groups as part of our process to really begin to align. And then really this broader notion of ecosystem development, identifying new funders and pools of capital to come into this space, identifying where the specific needs of capital are, how we can begin to connect the dots between those who need capital and those who have capital, and really to make this really kind of the ecosystem concept everywhere from farm or pre-farm, you know, to some of these products that end up in the hands of eaters, for those agroforestry products that are eaten. And you know, in terms of you know, next steps for this working group, you know, we've identified specifically with the climate smart commodities grants and programs, including the one that Savanna Institute and TNC and many others are involved in. But there are a few other of these large grants that have agroforestry components in them, and identifying the opportunities where these the government funds can provide for some of what is needed, but not all of what is needed, in terms of the capital to bring some of these projects and some of these putting more trees in the ground on purpose. and to begin to align sources of private capital with the sources of public capital in order to really advance the state and the field of agroforestry. So that's what I think this group is going to be working on in this next iteration. For those of you who are interested in the capital and finance side are of course welcome to join. Those of you who have specific needs of funding, we're always eager to hear those from the group, or please pass those to Kitt and she can pass it to us, and begin to connect you with the most appropriate source of capital that's going to show success for you, your farm, or your land, and the other social and environmental outcomes that are part of the broader agroforestry value proposition. How's that?
That's great. Thank you, David. Renee, would you mind coming on and telling us a little bit more about the communications working group?
Hi, I'm here. My computer is overwhelmed with everything that we're doing. So if I cut out at any moment, please bear with me. But I just want to share a brief overview of the work we've been doing on the communications working group. A huge shout out to Mallory Daly at the University of Missouri Center for Agroforestry, who's been co-leading this effort with me. She's been absolutely fantastic, especially recruiting Speakers Bureau participants. So I would love to open with that because we're really excited about the group of folks who have been coming together to populate our Speakers Bureau. So I'm showing you the website for the Agroforestry Coalition. If you haven't been here, please check out agroforestrycoalition.com. You can see the working groups overview here that Kitt gave, and also the Speakers Bureau. So we've gotten about 35 folks who have been willing to be the first group of speakers who we are sharing with press and with policymakers who want to share their story about agroforestry, what they're working on, and really help to educate the public with accurate and relevant information about agroforestry. And part of the things we've been doing for the Coalition Speakers Bureau is we've been working with a publicist, Frontwood Strategies, who's coaching us through ways we can communicate with the general public via press interviews, whether they be on video like this, how to deliver a dynamic video interview with a media outlet. We also did a training around op-eds. So we're looking to get more opinion pieces published in 2024. If either of these are things that sound interesting to you, we would love to have you join our Speakers Bureau. We are collecting nominations. We have about 35 people who've joined so far, and we're looking to get to about 50. So if you'd like to be part of that group, we would invite you to fill out our nomination form, either for yourself, you can self-nominate, or you can nominate a colleague. And this referral process is how we've been vetting our participants for the Agroforestry Coalition. The other big piece of our work on the communications working group is the policy white paper that we mentioned. So we worked with the policy working group to publish a 2023 policy paper titled Catalyzing Agroforestry in the Farm Bill, Recommendations for Resilient Agriculture. And this was a pretty big project to bring 20 authors together to share the most relevant and researched information in one document that was both all-inclusive and comprehensive to what we want to communicate about agroforestry in 2023 leading up to the Farm Bill. So I encourage you to take a look at this. Look it over, read what is written, give us your thoughts. How would you have done it differently? What would you have said? What things stand out to you that are really effective? We want to hear back from the community if we feel like we hit the mark with this paper. Alongside this paper, we also created a short version for all those policymakers who just want a glance. So we do have a handout here if you're looking for just a one-page thing to hand out at your winter conferences or something like that. A huge thank you to everyone who contributed photography and art to the paper. One of the most consistent pieces of feedback was how visually stunning the images and artwork were in the paper. And I have to say that really goes a long way to getting people's attention. When they see something beautiful, they pay attention. So thank you everyone who helped build our collection of photography to go into that paper. The other thing I wanted to share with you, let's see, can you see this tab? This is a Google folder. I'm going to paste the link in the chat, but we did create a media kit to go along with this release. So if you are looking for, Facebook images about agroforestry, we've created a few that you can share on your channels. We have a website for the Agroforestry Coalition. We didn't do social media handles because as communications professionals, we know how much work it is to manage social media. So we're really relying on our community to share these materials out through your own social media channels. And we've provided tools to help you do that easily. And again, this is all a work in progress. So if you see a message on one of these graphics that you think could be improved, we want to hear from you. We want you to join one of our communications working groups and help us workshop these phrases and ideas and keywords that we're using to communicate agroforestry. One thing we've heard consistently through the Agroforestry Coalition is people still aren't quite sure about using the word agroforestry. In 2024, we're going to explore more of the kind of consumer marketing angle for the communications working group. I would say in 2023, we were really focused on policymakers. We wanted them to know the word agroforestry because we want them to know when they're looking through their appropriations funding and they have the option to fund the National Agroforestry Center, that they know what the word agroforestry means. So we did lean into this word in 2023. But I think the 2024 conversation is still happening. We have a lot of interest in really leaning more into perennial agriculture in general and looking more at consumer food marketing. So how do we get people interested in eating things that are grown from perennial crops? And one of the strategies we're looking to explore, and we've just received funding from the Walton Family Foundation to help explore this topic, is what if we had a marketing board that didn't focus exclusively on one crop, but it actually focused on a collection of crops, like a perennial marketing board. Could that be an effective way to help grow the consumer demand and production capacity for agroforestry products? So if you are interested in talking more about the Speakers Bureau and talking to press and policymakers, if you're interested in talking more about options for consumer marketing and potentially a perennial foods marketing board, we would love to invite you to participate with the Agroforestry Coalition Communications Working Group. We will kick up our meetings again starting in January. We also have let me see if I can find it now. If you attended our nutshells yesterday, Mallory gave a wonderful presentation with including some crowdsourced tools that we can use to crowdsource information on communications for agroforestry. So I'm going to post that Jamboard in the chat. If anyone would like to share their thoughts about communications related to agroforestry, this Jamboard is a great place to do it. So I'll wrap there and turn it back over to you, Kitt. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. All right, we have about 10 minutes left here for some questions. So we'd love to hear questions from folks. If you want to just raise a hand or pop a question into the chat, we're paying attention to both places. And anything that you're curious about, anything that we skimmed over and you want to go deeper on, please speak up and let us know.
Can't figure out how to raise my hand, but I have a question.
Great.
Just in relation to this last comment about establishing consumer marketing or perennial crop marketing board, we've done a lot of both producer market research, consumer market research at the Center for Agroforestry for about 20 years. And I think one thing that's going to be important, and I know this is ongoing from other coalitions, is that it's going to be important to really identify the crops and the markets that are actually viable and growing, rather than just trying to push something where the market may already be saturated and there isn't an opportunity for a lot of people to jump in and find that they can't really market or they can't get a good price. So I think some background work needs to be done before anything really gets promoted just because we wish it would be good. Just a comment.
Yeah, and I would love to echo that. One of the things we got funded for was to do a consumer survey. So that would be the first step. We're really trying to identify consumer trends before we start promoting crops. So thank you for raising that.
Other questions or helpful comments like that one? Hello, I can only see the first part of your name because of just the way my Zoom is, but I see your hand is up, so please go ahead.
This is Brooke from Idaho. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. I have a question sort of on the coalition's approach to scale. So the question of how do we ensure that agroforestry, as we're trying to scale it, goes to actual sustainable regenerative projects, which tend to be smaller in size. So replicating small regenerative agroforestry projects rather than funding getting funneled to the very, very large corporates who slap the names on things that I would not consider to actually be healthy and regenerative, and along with the true principles of agroforestry. You know, and we've talked about in other days these monocrops of trees that we're seeing going in as a climate smart solution, and you know, this tendency of the markets and the capital stewards. So David, maybe you want to weigh in on this on the finance side, but how do we fund small regenerative farmers rather than all of this very large funding going to corporates? I'm just really not seeing this trickling down to small scale farmers.
Thank you. What a great question. I love this question about scale because, as you know, part of the description and the mandate for the coalition is scaling agroforestry. And I know that others, and I definitely am this way too, where I have this immediate like, but what do we mean by that? How are we doing this scaling? And so I really love this framework of thinking not just about scaling up, but scaling out and scaling deep. And the scaling out and the scaling deep are really important parts of the coalition's methodology and the way that we work. So I'd say that from the coalition perspective, so because we, through the advocacy work, we can sort of influence the way that policies and these federal programs and the way that the rules are written to distribute money. The coalition itself, and in the structure of the coalition, I would say that the main way that we're addressing the concern that you brought up is the way that we prioritize relationships. So the relationships, the deep scaling that we're doing is intentionally building relationships with people who are doing agroforestry at every scale, but particularly at a small to medium scale, and really making sure that we're also creating space for, you know, educational demonstration sites, for food forests, for urban food forests, for agroforestry in its many, many iterations. We haven't yet, we are holding a big tent for conversation and especially for questions like this to come up and to be grappled with within the group. But the elements of making sure that the way that we're scaling is by building tremendous relational groundwork is partially with the intent that that sort of implicit value of many diverse systems across the landscape continues to sort of guide and provide the boundaries for the structure. Because if those are the people who we're drawing in, and if those are the people, those are the voices that we're amplifying, then that becomes the way that these decisions get made. So we don't have a firm boundary of like, well, we won't work with you if you're planting a monoculture of trees on land on a bajillion acres. There isn't that scale boundary that's firm. It's more the way that we're prioritizing relationship development. But I would also love to hear from others who are engaged in the coalition if you have sort of a different take on this question of scale.
I think from the capital side, you could look at that from multiple perspectives. There are entities both in the coalition and more broadly that are, deploying capital for very large agroforestry oriented farms, or we're in touch with some folks out on the West Coast who have brought in finance to create large hazelnut operations. There's also a number of colleagues that we work with that focus on excuse me, getting that money to smaller scale farmers. So I think that there, you know, just as there is a range of types of farms, there's a range of types of capital, and you know, I think the magic here is to begin to make sure that that money we reduce the number of barriers to that money flowing, and in this case, I'd say especially for some of these smaller scale operations. And then also making sure that there's the coordinated infrastructure to make sure that, you know, not everybody has to have a nutcracker or a juice press or the pieces that are needed to coordinate those products getting to market.
We have 3 minutes left. If someone else wants to weigh in on this question, it's just such fertile ground for discussion. I would love to hear that. And also, if someone wants to jump in with another question, that would also be welcome.
Well, I'll just say that this is one thing that I really loved about working at the demonstration site team, is that we cast a really broad net when we were thinking about demonstration sites, which can range from demonstrations that are run by the federal government at like plant material centers, or universities that have a lot of capital investment, but also really tiny in terms of their footprint on the land, but really powerful community-based organizations that partner with food kitchens and welcome, you know, like kids of all ages onto the land, you know, onto these sites to see agroforestry in many different kinds of configurations that can both be about, you know, germplasm and propagation, as well as connecting folks with how landscape diversity and plant diversity is important for, you know, like insect diversity and the kinds of foods that we can snack on after school. And so I think that it was just the demonstration sites is a really beautiful part of this question, is how do we also support everything in between, not only focusing on these large, you know, the large, very kind of scalable versions of agroforestry.
Thanks for weighing in, everyone. Well, we have 1 minute left, so if there's a quick question, I'd love to hear it, but then I know we need to come off the phone. So it's not a phone. Why do I keep saying that? Thank you all so much for taking the time to be here today, to ask your questions. And we would love to hear from you. There's plenty of opportunity to get involved with the Agroforestry Coalition, and it's just beginning. It's just beginning, and it's going to change so much over the next couple of years. So if you want to be on this journey with us, again, please get in touch and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Great work, Kitt. Great work, everyone. Guess we can stop recording.
Is someone else coming into this room right after us? Just wanted to see.